Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar series has been convened by the Critical Zone Network Early Career Network in partnership with the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. This is the second series of a few series that the CZN Early Career Network has planned with the goal of enhancing collaboration and synthesis across CZ observatory and watershed sites. This is the fourth week of this series, Tools for Integrating and Synthesizing Data from CZOs and Watershed Sites. This series will continue each week at this time until December 2nd, with a brief hiatus for Thanksgiving here in the States. All of the previous webinars in this series can be found on the CUAHSI YouTube channel, as well as the webinars from the previous series that the CZN Early Career Network has hosted. My name is Julia Masterman. I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for CUAHSI. CUAHSI is the consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science, and our mission is to advance water science by strengthening interdisciplinary collaboration, providing critical infrastructure, and promoting education in water science at all levels through programs in part like this Cyberseminar series. CUAHSI also serves as the national coordinating hub for the Critical Zone Collaborative Network, or CZCN, and we're thankful to members of the CZNet team for their contributions to this series. On a related note, the CZNet team is hosting another webinar series on data management, somewhat concurrently with this one. It will consist of mini workshops and presentations from the CZ Hub team as well as data help sessions. It would be a great opportunity to ask questions and get one-on-one help from CZ Hub team members, and sessions are being held every Wednesday, and more information will be in the chat. A few logistical things for this series. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the CUAHSI YouTube channel later this afternoon. Secondly, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to submit questions to our panelists. Feel free to do that throughout the talks today. And finally, we expect that all involved with CUAHSI Cyberseminars promote and maintain a professional, considerate, respectful, and collaborative virtual environment. So thank you for being a part of that. Thank you again for joining us, and to the CZN Early Career Network team for putting together another fantastic lineup of presentations this week. And thank you to our presenters for taking the time today to join us. Today's session is on statistical information processing approaches. And with that, I'll pass the mic to CZN Early Career Network steering committee member and also one of our speakers today, Bhavna Arora.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, very excited for this particular seminar. As Julia mentioned somewhat, this particular series is really thinking about what are transferable and broadly applicable tools, workflows, and simulation capabilities. We have had a great lineup of talks prior to this session. All of them are available on the CUAHSI's YouTube channel. And the next one is in particular on scale-aware approaches. So another exciting one coming up. I do want to say we have an AGU fall meeting early career workshop, which is designed to bring all of this together, what the tools are, what the most important science priorities are, and target some of synthesis and integration activities across these critical zone networks. That workshop is going to be held on December 9th, and we have a great lineup of speakers there as well. So I recommend, if that's something of interest, to please join us there. The AGU fall meeting should have the registration there, and I'll share it in the chat as well. So with that, I want to pass this on to Sylvain.
Thank you, Bhavna. So yes, welcome to everyone. And so today we have a session on statistical and information approaches. We will have a broad range of presentations which aim at generating umbrella questions, really about how we can use dataset information and build database as well, the current bottlenecks, etc. Well, I think we will start now. And our first speaker today is Louis Derry, who is a professor at Cornell University and also a visiting professor at IPGP in Paris. Lou, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Okay, here we go. Looks like we have the right one up there.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm actually not seeing it myself, but that's interesting. Okay, well, let me go back to that. So I'm going to give a little bit of a hybrid presentation here because let's make sure this is all good. Are you still seeing the right one? Okay.
Yes, but you're not in presentation
Right,
mode.
now,
So
okay, now we're good. In fact, I had data on my mind when Sylvain talked to me about this, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences with data and that build the foundation that we can use to kind of do some of the statistical analysis. So here's my perspective. I was the PI for a number of years or I guess I still am nominally for the U.S. Critical Zone Observatory's national office. And we ended up with the responsibility for developing a data system. We did that in close collaboration with CUAHSI. On the advisory board for the OSCAR, the French CZO program. I've had interactions with lots of the CZ programs around the world. And mostly I'm just a guy who needs data sometimes and not a data specialist. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things we ran into that have some bearing on the kinds of things that we can do with that data. CZ data is very diverse, so it's really more so than any other kind of data sets that I've worked with. We have spatial data, including three-dimensional data. If we go down in the soil column, up in the canopy, we have time series data. We have data sets that combine both the spatial and temporal variability. And we have a really wide range of types of parameters that are being collected. These are climate inputs, they're physical measurements, hydrologic measurements, chemical and isotopic measurements that are often very specific to the technique that you're using, and ecological measurements, which can be quite different, and then genomic measurements and other microbiological measures, which again can be quite different. All of these things make the data systems for CZOs or critical zone pretty complex. So one of the things that obviously you recognize right away is that any sort of data system requires extensive metadata because the types of data are so diverse and the methods that are used to collect even similar data can be diverse. So this is a lot more complex than standard geophysical or even standard hydrologic data where you have a gauge, maybe that's fixed in space at least, and that even the same kinds of materials that are being measured for something, there's a wide variety of materials, and sometimes a technique that works in one area won't work well in another area. So sometimes there's good reasons why the techniques are different from site to site. And even so, we found in a practical sense, the idea of common protocols, which our sponsors are very interested in, was really sort of impractical to implement in many ways. So that makes life pretty complicated. So what we want to do is we want to be able to access and represent these complex data sets in an efficient way. And what the biggest message is, none of this is fast or easy or cheap. And I think systematically the effort involved in doing this kind of work correctly has been underestimated by everyone, including us, until we got into the middle of it and we realized what we had. So here's some lessons that I think, a few lessons that we learned in the US CZONO program. There was initially some understanding there needed to be a data system. There was an initial effort done by a couple of scientists who basically kind of gave up after a while and moved on to doing other things because they were a little bit in over their head in terms of the data the coding skills and all that sort of thing. But then it got handed over to a group that was essentially cyber people. And they had all the coding skills you could ask for, but they didn't know what we wanted and why we wanted it. So they spent a lot of money and a lot of time coming up with a system that wasn't effective. So the problem is the left hand and the right hand were both trying to do the right thing and they weren't meeting one another. So what the fundamental lesson I think that I took away from this is that we as scientist users have to be directly involved in a hands-on way through the design and implementation process of a data system, because otherwise it just doesn't come out right. And so we can't hope that someone else creates a data system for us. Yes, we need to work with the people who have the coding skills that can develop some of the things that many of us don't have the time or expertise to do, but we really have to be in the room with them all the time. And simplicity is a virtue, but some of these problems are just not simple. So that's one of the most important lessons. You can't hope someone else fixes it for you. Another thing is that because these data sets are complex, the best systems that I've seen that even on less complex data, have pretty extensive cataloging that for discovery purposes, so that you can find data from multiple different pathways, because otherwise you can be at a site, visit the site, and never realize some of the kinds of data they have if it's not a sort of distributed system that's accessible from lots of different points of view. One example that's good is the CDAC site, but they only have carbon data there, so it's relatively simple. Then we have the issue of populating the database, and funding agencies require that people post their data, and so the answer is mostly yes, but a data system has to be reasonably user-friendly so that people will add the data, and that time series data have to be constructed in a way that may be updated. And time series data in particular are quite important for the kind of work that we want to do, because we can't do statistical time series analysis if we don't have time series, or if you're certainly all aware of the techniques for working with time series that have missing values and that are non-homogeneous. But if you have too many of those techniques really kind of break down. So long time series are really essential for a lot of CZ work. This has been difficult for some funding agencies to get their head wrapped around. So we have to keep pushing that argument. Another kind of issue that we have is the spatial statistics, correlation link scales, things like that. There's been not nearly enough of that work done, most likely, again, because assembling the data sets is pretty challenging. So these are the kinds of things that good data sets can enable and allow the kind of powerful statistical techniques that exist to be applied, but only if the data are reasonably continuous, well documented, and available. And so that's and that turns out to be more work than we hoped it would be. I want to thank CUAHSI for all the work they did on making the CZO database that exists a reality, because their expertise and their ability to host large data sets was really essential for us to do this with a reasonable amount of effort and the modest budget that we had from NSF. So those are my main observations, and I'll stop there because I think I'm getting to time.
All right, thank you, Lou, for your presentation and for staying on time. I think that was a very nice introduction of our today's session. So I'm now going to pass the mic to Isabelle Braud from INRAE in Grenoble in France. So Isabelle, you can start to share your screen and the floor is yours.
So, thank you for inviting me to present today this work we've done in the OSCAR French Critical Zone Network. So it's a master student work which aimed at using hydrological signatures over a set of small catchments from the OSCAR network with homogeneous characteristics. And the questions we wanted to answer was, is the set of hydrological signatures relevant to characterize the functioning of catchments and to identify classes of similar hydrological behavior? And
Isabelle,
can
sorry
yes.
to interrupt. I think we can't see your screen for now.
I'm sorry. So I share the whole screen.
Yep, excellent. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. And also can this classification be explained by the hydroclimatic and physiographic characteristics of the catchments? So the set of catchments is presented here with stars. So we have about 30 catchments from 0.6 to 130 square kilometers with about from 5 to 50 years of data. So they are mostly located in France, but also in the Caribbean, in West and North Africa, India, and West Asia. And they cover a large diversity of topography and climate and geology. So the data that were used are daily discharge, rainfall, and reference evapotranspiration, which were used to compute the hydrological signatures which are interannual averages, and they were computed for the whole year and for wet and dry seasons. And on the other hand, we also used a digital terrain model, use geology maps to compute descriptors of the catchments, like average slopes, altitude, topographic index, drainage density, and so on. So the catchments cover a large some variety of climates with an aridity index from 0.3 to 2. And you have here the Bodico curve, which allows to see that the data are quite consistent. And here I present the hydrological signatures, which were computed, and they try to document different catchment functions, like partition between evapotranspiration and stream flow release, partitioning of at the ground surface between release slow and fast flow, also catchment storage and catchment release. And they document various aspects of the hydrological cycle, like volume, like runoff coefficient or base flow index. There are some signatures about magnitude and frequency of floods, which are related to the flow duration curve, with some indicators like the 10th and 19th percentiles and the slope of the flow duration curves. They also document seasonality with, here you have the interannual value, daily value of base flow index. So we consider the base flow magnitude, and also what we call the P minus Q curve. So it's rainfall minus discharge at the interannual daily value. And you can see that sometimes there are break-off slopes. So the two slopes and the date of the break is one signature. And we have also event signatures, which characterize the time scale of early and late recessions. And I also forgot to mention here the fraction of zero flow. And all these green points, they means that this signature is related to the processes which are numbered here. So they were computed for about 30 catchments, and you have here the results of a pre-simple component analysis. So in black, you have the various signatures, and in blue, it's related to the topographic or land use characteristics, as well as the rainfall and evapotranspiration. So we can distinguish various groups of signatures. So here we have intermittency and flashiness. Here we have signatures related to seasonality, which are related to temperature, wetness index, and percentage of crop. And here it's a signature of runoff volume, high flow, and they are related to rainfall, slope, and forest. And here we have the signature related to base flow and recessions. And then this PCR analysis was used to make hierarchical clustering, and it provides here 4 classes of catchments. So in black, these are mainly highly intermittent catchment with high flashiness, and explaining variables are evapotranspiration and transpiration and temperature. In green, it's a class with a high runoff coefficient, high annual and wet rainfall season, and a low base flow magnitude. And in blue, we have catchments with slow recession, base flow index, low base flow magnitude, and related to evapotranspiration, and also to the slope of the flow duration curves. And in the middle, it's a catchment with low winter rainfall and characterized by their 10th percentile. So it's a first analysis. So the main achievement was to be able to compute this signature for a large set of OSCAR catchments. They are able to discriminate between groups of catchments. Maybe highly intermittent catchments requires a specific treatment, So the perspective could be to consolidate the results with a comparison with what is known about this catchment's behavior, and incorporate more information on saprolite depth or soil storage capacity. And I think it will be interesting to expand this kind of analysis with catchments from other CZO networks, and in particular tropical humid climate, and also to extend the set of hydrological signature following the work of Wlotowski, who did a kind similar work for the US CZO catchments. So here you have the references, and I thank you for your attention. And sorry if I was maybe too long.
All right. Thank you, Isabelle. It was just fine for the time. I will now leave Sam Sipper to start to share his screen. And so Sam Sipper is a geohydrologist at the University of Kansas in the USA. Yeah, Sam, whenever you want, you can start.
All right, thanks everyone. Can you see the right screen now? All right, super. Well, thanks for the invitation. It's really great to be here and hear all these good perspectives. Like Sarah said, my name is Sam Zipper. I'm at the Kansas Geological Survey, which is part of the University of Kansas here in the US. And I won't have as much data to share as the last one, which is really fascinating, but I kind of wanted to present what I'm calling a tale of two watersheds, as I was sort of reflecting on sort of the prompt and topic of this seminar. These are two sites that I spend a lot of my time working at. The one on the left is the Arkansas River, which flows through south central Kansas. I was actually out there Monday through Wednesday of this week collecting some geophysical data, which was really fun. The weather was beautiful, so I was happy to be out there. The one on the right is the Konza Prairie, which is in a different part of Kansas, but another beautiful example of our Midwestern watersheds. And the reason I wanted to kind of highlight these two is because in my work at these two, I've really thought a lot about sort of the data challenges and data opportunities that we have at these sites and how to connect with the broader research community. Both of these field sites I'm interested in because they have really interesting non-perennial flow regimes. So the watersheds don't flow year round. They have multiple kind of perched and stacked aquifers that have various flow paths kind of connecting through the surface and the subsurface. This has created a number of very complicated feedbacks all the way from the bedrock all the way up to the atmosphere that include interactions among the hydrology, ecology, geology, and biogeochemistry of the systems. And both have been researched for decades. So I've had a lot of, long-term interdisciplinary insights that have come out of these sites. But where these two are really different is in kind of the data history. So Konza Prairie is part of the long-term ecological research network. It's a NEON site here in the US. So it's had sustained long-term funding, a number of core data sets that have been collected over the years, and has really had a lot of different people working on it. That has all been integrated by data managers, public repositories that are putting things together and getting them plugged into these different access points that Lewis talked about, environmental data initiative, et cetera. The other one, the one on the left, the Arkansas River, has been much more of, we maybe call it a bespoke research site. It's been piecemeal, kind of put together project by project to sort of develop and maintain the long-term monitoring we have at the site by kind of a core, relatively small group of researchers here at the Kansas Geological Survey. As a result, the data is very scattered across, different publications, reports, different people's hard drives, different floors here in the building. Just kind of fundamental difference is that this is a very heavily human active watershed. So there's a lot of landowners that require interaction with as well. So kind of working at these two sites really made me kind of cognizant of, Lewis mentioned at the beginning, it's easier to start with a good data management plan than it is to put one in after the fact. And this is really a case in point of the one on the right, data management. I don't know how focal it was in the 1980s, but it, at the very least, kind of started with a consistent framework, whereas the one on the left just simply did not have that due to kind of a limited amount of resource. But that said, I do think it's really critical as we think about integrating and cross-site collaboration and research. How do we take the sites like this one on the left that have had, a lot of research done by a relatively small number of individuals that have really kind of been put together piece by piece as opposed to being already part of one of these integrative networks, and get them into our collaborative and cross-site comparisons. So as I was kind of reflecting on that, I just, a few bullet points that kind of I thought of was it's important to both collect new data, but also to incentivize data rescue and data recovery from these sites, especially ones that aren't part of these networks, and figure out how we can get that data from those sites into the repositories that we're all using, into the discovery points that was mentioned. And I think especially, as someone who works at kind of a pseudo academic institution, sort of on the boundary between a state agency and a university, I think it's really, there's a lot of potential value in looking beyond just kind of the research community, but also to the water management and agency communities for data sources that can be kind of integrated in. And to facilitate this, I don't know how to do this, but I think it's really critical to make the metadata generation and data upload process, very easy and pain-free. Because if you're doing kind of data rescue and data recovery, there's so much, emailing people and trying to figure out, okay, what exactly did they do, that it's a very time-intensive effort, and really making it as quickly and as intuitive as possible to get that metadata put together, I think will really enable cross-site research, in particular for these sites that maybe have been out of the historical network and network of networks. And I would also, point out that, whether, regardless of the site, we don't want to forget about models and derived data products as well, and the scripts that we've used to make them. So I've just highlighted a few different examples I know of for people that use R. Myself and some others have put together a big collection of packages for hydrologic data analysis, processing, and modeling. I'm not involved in this RCN, but I'm really excited to see what they're doing, figuring out best practices for preservation and replicability of model data. And I've just kind of pulled out a few other examples of open source, either data collection and aggregation efforts, like the soil water infiltration global database, or processing and model development tools. And I think that where data rescue is challenging, model rescue can perhaps be even more challenging because of the number of different sort of subjective platforms and parameters and things like that we have to integrate together. So, but these models and having kind of a strong framework for comparing among models and derived data products, I think is going to be really critical to bridging these gaps. So that's kind of what I had, and I'd like to thank you all for the invitation.
Thank you, Sam, for this very nice presentation and a lot of food for thought, I think. I will now would like to introduce Bhavna Arora, who a lot of us know already. She's a geochemist at the Berkeley lab in the US. And Bhavna, please, you can start to share your screen and start your presentation whenever you feel ready.
Thank you. Can you see my screen and hear me okay? Okay,
yes, we can.
Perfect. Yeah, so I approached this a bit differently from what has been said before. I approached it from a perspective of, we're working across our individual sites, but have we developed approaches that are transferable and interoperable? So today I'm going to be discussing some approaches where the data is perfectly aligned, and how do we use, or how can we use some statistical techniques to identify, interrogate, or model hotspots and hot moments. So quickly, just to bring everybody on the same page, hotspots and hot moments are considered to be really small in size, both either in the spatial or the temporal domain, but they're considered to have a large contribution to biogeochemical cycles. So an example on the top here is from a critical zone site that's looking at swales as hotspots of dissolved organic carbon export. A lot of the riparian zone features also qualify as hotspots. At the bottom of the presentation, you can see snowmelt timings or re-vetting events show hot moments. So this is resulting in large pulses of CO2 being released into the atmosphere. And again, we have accidental releases that can qualify as hot moments. And the question here is, how do we, what are the challenges if we know so much about them in going beyond our individual sites to be able to quantify these geochemical hotspots and hot moments? So this is work that was published in WRR from our group. And what it's showing is water table rise that's happening in a synchronous fashion across the entirety of that floodplain after snowmelt occurs. But you can see at the bottom of the panel that nitrate response to that snowmelt is asynchronous. So both in terms of the magnitude and the timing of when that nitrate begins to rise, there are significant spatial and temporal trends in that data. And that makes it really difficult because there are multiple interacting parameters that are controlling the nitrate concentrations at this site. And there are several site-specific parameters that are controlling biogeochemical concentrations. And that makes it really difficult to characterize when these geochemical hot moments may occur. The other challenge is that we need to watch out for these hotspots, hot moments, especially under climate change. I want to acknowledge that there is this urgency to do this under future climate change scenarios. So even if they are linked with hydrologic flow events, you can think that environmental flow regimes are going to change, at much greater frequency and with changes in intensity now. So we can assume that, going forward, we might have much lower flows than what we've observed so far, or much higher flows and much greater variability, both at seasonal, annual, and decadal scales. So we definitely need some of these capabilities that are transferable to be able to characterize this variability and capture these hotspots and hot moments of nutrient dynamics. So the first approach I wanted to introduce here is the wavelet entropy approach. Wavelets are really advantageous because they provide time frequency characterization. So again, if you have that perfect time series of data, you can plug that into a continuous wavelet transform and look at, where are those discontinuities happening within your nutrient time series data or any other time series data. What are the seasonal trends? What are the annual trends? And depending upon how long time series of data you have. And for biogeochemical data sets, they are really advantageous because they show natural variability at multiple scales. The other cool thing is the way I've approached this is to combine this with other statistical concepts such as Shannon entropy. So by using concepts like mutual information, we can get into the causality of what's causing the nutrient dynamics. Why are we seeing the nutrient hot moments at the times we are seeing them? So it captures those shared information between your dynamics and the hydroclimatic flows. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the insights we have found through the use of wavelet entropy type approaches. So this one was our wavelet data sets that were applied to nutrient releases at a saltwater estuary. What you see here is nitrite concentration being put into that continuous wavelet transform, and you see 12-month frequency coming out of a monthly data set. And all of these were significantly correlated with the wet years. The wet years like 2005, 2006, you can see the hot moments for nitrite coming up. The other thing that was interesting with this data set was while nitrite showed this annual frequency kind of consistently throughout the time period of analysis, nitrate kind of went back and forth. So you could see we saw high nitrate concentration in the early part of this analysis and in the late part, but not in the middle. So we plugged this into a Hurst exponent and looked at what it means if the future, predicting the future climatic time series, and we would expect an anti-persistent or a mean reversion behavior for nitrate, but not so much for nitrite. So we'll probably see persistent behavior with wet years going forward. In the same estuary, we also zoomed in into data for the past year to look at what's actually controlling the tidal variability that we see there. So this was data that was collected within Margaret Zimmer's group at UCSC. And we're looking at in situ redox probes and comparing that with subsurface water levels. So you can quickly see that the tidal frequencies are when that flushing of the Elkhorn Slough happens, but the water table fluctuations are in phase and out of phase at some times. I see the time. I'm going to quickly go through this. This is another work that we did, and what we're seeing is that hydrologic parameters are controlling what we discussed just now for 2 of these transects, but not really for a transect that had a different lithologic heterogeneity. So clay-dominated controls, and there's no information sharing with any of the hydroclimatic parameters. And then last but not the least, we have another approach up our sleeves where we're looking at a differential CQ analysis, which means what is the difference between concentration versus difference in discharge, telling us about which of the river reaches are really hotspots of concentration. So while you may have traditional CQ approaches that kind of show the same L-shaped curve that you see for nitrate, here we can see where are the gains happening and at what time. So just to end here with saying, you know, some of these approaches, or actually all of these approaches, are really robust and transferable to interrogate and identify hotspots and hot moments. And I would recommend checking these out. So thank you.
Thank you, Bhavna. Yeah, and it's already time for our last speaker of today's seminar. So I'm really happy to introduce Chaopeng Shen, who's a hydrologist at Pennsylvania State University, also in the USA. So Chaopeng, please yeah, share your screen and feel free to start whenever you feel comfortable. I think we can't hear you.
Geez. Okay. Thanks for the invitation. Today I want to talk about connecting data theories and machine learning using differentiable hydrology. First of all, a lot of the work here is done by my grad student, Dr. Bhavna, and postdoc Wen Tsai. All right. I will only talk about on a very high level, of course, due to the limited time we have here. What I consider as the first phase of hydrologic deep learning, we've already seen a lot of success with machine learning. One particular example was this short-term memory, and we've seen the examples where we simulated soil moisture and stream flow, and a lot of other people's work in the community as well proved that these kind of deep learning models work very well for hydrologic variables. In fact, we extended this kind of analysis to stream temperature, dissolved oxygen, phosphorus, and hydrology under a managed catchment, with reservoirs. And it turns out that a uniform architecture like LSTM works very well for all of these problems. So it's there's a lot of success. However, these kind of success doesn't give us one thing. Okay. These kind of models, to me, they look like these emotionless robots. They are purely data-driven. They are, emotionless, cold-blooded, and they're driving human modelers all over the places. I mean, they just do a darn good job. However, we have trouble understanding these models. They provide limited insights, and in turn, we need robots that listen to us, or mixed models that is a mixture of human brains and metal components that really are able to provide us with more scientific insights. So the first step in that direction is this differentiable parameter learning that I'm promoting right now. And this paper was published just 3 weeks ago. Basically, we were motivated by the question, how about the variables that we cannot observe? This is very relevant to the critical zone research, because the data sets aren't as large as some of the continental scale data sets that we have for hydrologic modeling. And we can't observe some of the variables such as evapotranspiration, groundwater, deep soil moisture. So there's many other constraints where the purely data-driven machine learning paradigm just doesn't apply. So this is where connecting the physics with machine learning really helps. And we are promoting that we should go from a previous paradigm with that is parameter calibration to this paradigm called a differentiable parameter learning. Okay, so parameter calibration was a primary method for reconciling models with data, but I think the DPL really offers a much more powerful paradigm. Okay, so on a high level, we calibrate the VIC, the variable infiltration capacity model, using SMAP model, SMAP soil moisture data over continental United States, and this DPL scheme. So on a high level, the schemes look fairly complex, but just focus on the speed component. So we are training a neural network here, G of A, which is a mapping from static attributes such as soil texture and land cover, and supposedly some other attributes from the landscape, map that into parameters which are needed by the process-based models. Okay, so these are the data that are fed into this process-based models, which then output some variables to be compared with the observations to give you a loss function. So this really freed you from the fact that you have to have a lot of observations for certain variables. Okay, and it doesn't have to be what the models output, because your process-based models output a variety of observations. Now, the main difficulty here is that most of the process-based models are not differentiable, so we cannot do this training framework in a machine learning way. So the machine learning way relies on a gradient descent and backpropagation, and these process-based models are typically not differentiable. So you have two choices. One is you re-implement it on a differentiable platform such as PyTorch or TensorFlow. The other is you can train a surrogate model that is differentiable, and the neural networks are already differentiable. Okay, so I quickly go over some of the results. I won't have time to explain this, but the main message here is that we see that as you provide more data, there's an interesting scaling relationship where our RMSE ending metrics become better and better, our spatial generalization become better and better, our uncalibrated variable evapotranspiration, the correlation with observations become better and better. So overall, it becomes much better with data, and it's much more efficient. So if you were to calibrate this system in the old way, you need a 100 processor cluster machine, run it for 2 to 3 days. If you were to do it with DPL, you can get this done within one GPU within 1 hour. So there's a dramatic difference, and everything is doing better. And you can call it economy of scale or whatever you can call it. So this is talking about the uncalibrated variable and spatial generalization. And if you look at one of these parameters, you understand why. This is a parameter map outputted by DPL. This is what is outputted by shuffled complex evolutionary algorithm. And from the DPL, you get spatially coherent maps of parameters. Whereas SCEUA, the parameters are all over the places because of this famous problem of equifinality. But for DPL, you automatically get this spatial constraint because you have one uniform network trained to predict all the parameters over the continental United States. Okay, so actually, along this DPL path, I found there's a systematic way of informing model development and theories based on big data. And if your process-based model doesn't work very well, they look like these cute little dragons. That's not very threatening. But once you throw it with the DPL, it becomes a human-sized dragon that's a little threatening, but you feel like you can take it, right? But once you further grow your model, you can use the data to direct you to improve your model. Then that becomes a fully grown dragon that's very powerful, and it can do anything. And this is this is one of the curves I want to show you. This is the traditional way of an MPR, multi-scale parameter regionalization plus MHM hydrologic model. Once you throw it with the DPL, it's the DPL plus HBV that gives you the line in the middle. Okay, this is the CDF of the NSC of the Nash-Stott coefficient. So you're at 0.63 compared to 5.53, so clear advantages. And this green line is LSTM. So we still cannot beat LSTM because of model structure errors. And once you do the model, you grow your model, this would be the purple curve, and we're at 0.707 now with this modified version of HBV. And we did many things. One of the things is you look at the runoff to soil moisture relationships, and the original equation looks like a power law that doesn't curve up until 0.7 or 0.8 on the x-axis. However, once you let data direct you where it wants to be, we see that it wants to curve up way before 0.5. It wants to curve up at 0.4, which makes sense. Thinking about hydrology, you don't have to saturate the entire basin, only saturate the valley is sufficient for this connected runoff to occur. So with that, I'd like to close. I hope I'm doing well on time.
Yes, well, thank you, Chaopeng. Actually, you're just right on time. Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists for all this very diverse talks. And okay, so let's see. We have a bit of time for questions. So there are no questions in the Q&A for now. So feel free to drop any even in the next few minutes. So maybe I will ask a question that kind of touches on all of the presentation more or less. Lou Derry can't be here anymore because he ran for class, but I hope that contribution will come from all of you. So the question is basically, do we need more data sets, or do we need measurements, or do we need more analysis based on what we have already? Because, for example, in parallel to the currently improving databases, which were presented today and last week's webinar, should we have also ready-to-use tools to make the most of all this data? And a lot of these tools maybe could be derived from what you presented today. So more data, more analysis, a bit of both, whoever wants to jump in.
Well, maybe I can start to answer. Well, I think that we need probably both, but certainly it's necessary to better manage and gather all the existing data that are scattered on hard disk, on databases, and so on. And it's a really hard work, as Lou said, because for very old data, it's often difficult to find the metadata, the information on how these data were collected. But it's they are very valuable information. And I think that if we manage to gather all these data sets, and it's what I try to show with what we did in France, is that you can start to do some comparative analysis, and I think it can bring lots of information. But of course, we are also running models which are more and more complex and also with higher resolution. So probably that also more data are needed. But I think we have lots to do with trying to gather already existing data.
Thank you, Isabelle. Any other thoughts on this? When I mentioned tools, it's for analysis, but also for management, as a few of you mentioned today. So if you have any further thoughts you want to share on this.
I totally agree with what Isabelle said. I think we have a lot of approaches that are super powerful, like Chaopeng showed, the machine learning work. There have been wavelets, fractals, so much work has been done in terms of analyzing these data. I think we need more like data informaticians to get all of that data that's hidden or not accessible or not seen right now, to take this to the next level. As we're thinking about critical zone network of networks, it's thinking about how to harmonize that data, bring all of that data together. So I think Sam did a fantastic job covering, we may have published papers and other things, but maybe that data is just not available or at the same scale.
Yes, I would like to add that, yes, people with skill in computing are necessary, but scientists who collected the data are also really needed, because they are the only one who know the data they have collected. And I think that Lou said that, and it's really important. And in what we are trying to do in France in terms of data portal, it was presented, I think, last week by Sylvain. It's really important to associate scientists and computer engineering, because if not, computer engineering, they can design systems which are very nice, but which are useless for scientists. And they will never document the data.
Actually, Kathy did bring that up. So Kathy Brown gave a seminar with this group last week, and she was talking about the same issues like semantics of how that data is entered into the database. And we need the scientists to say, you know, what was the volume? What were the methods? Because for each of, you know, a computer scientist can come in and say, oh, this is soil pH, or this is, you know, XYZ, and was all measured with the same methods across these observatories, which may or may not be true. So yeah, a lot to think about there.
Yeah, I think it's really the challenge of not knowing, you know, if the methods were kind of implemented exactly the same, or if, you know, the numbers that you're seeing are actually, you know, an exact reflection of the same measured quantity, is one that especially gets harder, you know, the further back you look. You know, if there's, you know, a researcher that perhaps isn't active in the field anymore, that you can't like ask the question anymore, some of that, you know, kind of has a risk of being lost forever. So that's why I think there's really a lot of value in, you know, analyzing the data to learn what it is about it we still need to document and kind of understand. Because if we put all the data in the database but nobody looks at it, well, then you might not realize like, oh, these two different, you know, groups had an offset of, you know, 20% between their values, and clearly that's reflective of some sort of a methodological difference, but you got to look at it to find out that sort of thing. And yeah, that's a big challenge.
Thank you all for your feedback on this. I'd like to move on to the next question, because we have a question that was posted in the Q&A by Peter Vasva from Broad University. So I'm just going to read the question, but you can also read it in the Q&A panel. How do you go about physically based models versus conceptual models, as there is a confusion that the conceptual ones are better because they represent the whole system as a whole, while the physically based ones represent systems in cubes, which is not good? That's from Peter's question. So.
I mean, there has been a debate about process-based versus conceptual models for decades. And there was also, actually, I personally was on a paper which argued that the physics-based models were better because you can clearly explain the physical processes that happened as the rain event occurred. So. But I would say that in terms of the coupling with machine learning, the conceptual models are a little easier right now, just on a technical aspect. However, I think the process-based models will also be able to couple with machine learning, which takes a bit more effort to do it. But philosophically speaking, this is a big question, as there's so many aspects involved.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm getting hammered on reviews on a paper right now about a comparison between statistical and process-based models. So I've been thinking deeply about this. And at least, you know, in my kind of corner of the groundwater modeling world, there actually seems to be a strong bias towards the physically based numerical models, because they can represent all the aspects of the systems with equations that, you know, can be tied back to physical processes. And in many cases, those equations have to be parameterized with many highly uncertain parameters, which is where you get into kind of the challenge of it. But, you know, from kind of the practitioner standpoint, when you present a tool that has the equations for the processes they're thinking about in it, there just seems to be kind of a higher level of acceptance and trust of those, even though, you know, what I mentioned this paper I'm working on, there's a big complexity versus simplicity debate, as Chaopeng mentioned, and you know, the complex processes aren't always the most valuable. And I think that's why it's really kind of critical that we, you know, are archiving and sharing not just the models, but kind of the tools that were used to develop those models. So we can kind of see where are the assumptions baked in, where are the uncertainties baked in, and where are there, you know, different decisions that could go a different way. And by sharing that, we can test those decisions and the importance of them even after the fact. So I think it is a long-standing but ever important question.
Well, if no one has anything to add to this question, well, I think we have just a couple of minutes left, maybe for the last question. There are none in the Q&A, so since quite a few questions we had in mind were covered already, there's one that is actually connected to the first question I asked about the more analysis. Is in choosing what you do with the data, or if you acquire more data, how could this be oriented by maybe a current trend there is into a more low-tech kind of approaches to measuring or even to analyze the data? And related to this, because this is a very maybe timely question towards a lower carbon footprint kind of research, how could that feed or constrain the way you acquire data or you analyze the data? If you have any thoughts on this.
I guess my brief thought, and I'll let the others speak more eloquently, but my brief thought is that, you know, enabling kind of cross-site comparisons through organized and compiled data is an enormously low carbon way of doing research, because you don't have to have, you know, me from Kansas going out to France to kind of collect the same measurements in order to do a cross-site comparison. So I think the degree to which metadata and standardization are feasible is a big savings there. That's my quick 2 cents.
And I echo that. That's an excellent point. Also, you get lots of benefits when you pull the data together. So we look at this issue, especially with machine learning approaches, either purely data-driven approaches or coupled or hybrid machine learning process-based approaches. All of this were telling us that once you pull all the data together, you kind of get its magic. Your results become better, it becomes more efficient, it becomes also it's more spatially constrained, so it's less overfitted. So there's an effect that we call data synergy, where if you have a model that is trained on data from all of the places, it always turns out to be better than the model that's trained on a small region, which is kind of a counter to our intuition that we want to build specialized models previously, right? So there's a lot of benefits to be had when we pull the data together.
All right, well, thank you. If there's any final thoughts, otherwise I think we will close for today. Any final comments? Question we didn't touch on and you like to mention? Okay, so I think we are perfectly on time for today. We have 1 minute left. So again, with Sarah, we would like to thank all the presenters for today for very rich and diverse presentations and very good food for thought. Sarah, if you want to say a few words to close, and then we'll leave.
No, well, I'm just going to repeat what you said. Thank you very much to all the speakers. That was very instructive for me. And thanks for the vivid discussion as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
hosting it.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, please join us next week. All right. Thank you, Sylvain and Sarah. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.